Welcome to Wheelock's Latin Chapter 1. As you can see here, we'll be covering several topics in this chapter, various aspects of verbs as well as adverbs. Let's talk about verbs. Verbs are the most important word in a sentence. The word verb in English actually comes from the Latin word verbum. And I want to pause to remind you that the letter V in classical Latin is not pronounced V, it's a W sound, like a W. So this is verbum. So our word verb comes from the Latin word verbum, which means word. And it is the most important word of the sentence because it denotes the action that is taking place in the sentence, or often is action in the sentence, and thus is the most important word. There are two types of verbs that you will run into. There are transitive verbs and intransitive verbs. A transitive verb is one that requires a direct object. As you can see in this example, the boy ate the cake. Ate is a transitive verb. It is taking the direct object, cake, and it is being undertaken by boy, the subject. The boy is eating the cake. Intransitive verbs do not have a direct object, and they are often linking verbs. As you can see in this example, the word is a linking verb, and it does not have a direct object. What it often takes is a predicate adjective or predicate nominative that is describing, it's an adjective or a noun, it's describing the subject. And in this case, late is describing the word boy. It's a predicate adjective. And thus there is no direct object with intransitive verbs. Now, there are 5 characteristics of verbs that we need to be familiar with. And depending on how long ago we all had English, some of this may be something you remember or maybe not. So let's see what we can recall from previous studies of English grammar. The first one is voice. Voice determines if the subject is either doing or receiving the action. We'll unpack all of these characteristics here in just a few minutes, just a bit more. But voice determines if the subject is doing or receiving the action. Mood is the manner in which the action is taking place. Tense is the timing of the action. Person is the one who is performing the action according to the point of view of the speaker. And then we have number, which is the quantity of those who are doing the action. Let's look at these in just a little bit more detail. In the category of voice, we have 2 options, active and passive. An active verb means the subject is actively doing the action of the verb. In the passive verbs, it is the subject that is receiving the action of the verb. So if I were to say the boy, the boy pet the dog, the boy is doing the action, so the verb is active. If I say the boy was being bit by the dog, the subject boy is not doing the action, he is receiving the action. He is the one being bitten. And so that verb would be a passive verb. Mood. We have 3 options for mood. We have indicative, which is a statement. We'll again break these down just a tad bit more. Imperative is a command, and subjunctive is potential action. We'll again break these down just a bit more. Tense, we have 6 possibilities: present, imperfect, future, perfect, pluperfect, and future perfect. Under person, we have first person, second, and third persons. When we translate these, we'll use the English pronouns I or we. For first person, second person would be you or you all, and if you're Texas or Southern bound, you'll say y'all. Third person in the singular is he, she, and it, and then third person plural is they. And that brings us actually to the 5th characteristic, which is number. It is singular or plural. So we would say first person singular is I, and then first person plural would be we. Second person singular is you, and second person plural is you all. Now, quick note here, often when you translate, it's just awkward to say you all. So often when you translate it, you just simply say you. And both you and you singular and you plural can be viable options. And then for third person singular, we would say he, she, or it. And then for third plural, we would translate as they. So those are the 5 characteristics of verbs. Let's look a little bit more closely at the category of mood. The first option is indicative mood. Indicative mood is The mood that points out or indicates real action that has definitely, or if it's been negated, definitely not taken place in the past, present, or the future. The word indicative comes from the Latin word dico, which means to point out or to tell. The second type of mood we have in Latin is the imperative mood. And this actually, the word imperative comes from the Latin word impero, imperare, which we get the word emperor from. And it's a command. It emphatically commands someone to undertake an action that is not yet going on. And so an emperor is someone who gives a command. The third option in Latin is subjunctive mood. And we will go into subjunctive mood in significant detail in the second semester because it is significantly important and used extensively in Latin. So we won't discuss it beyond really this slide, but next semester we'll talk quite a bit. But we do want to understand that it is the mood of potential, tentative, hypothetical, ideal, or unreal action. English will often use auxiliary words to help convey the idea of subjunctive mood, like would, may, might, should, may have, would have, etc. So those are the three types of moods. Now, another thing that you need to be familiar with in Latin is the idea of conjugations. Big fancy word there, conjugations. Latin verbs are grouped according to the vowel at the end of the base or stem. And there are 4 different groupings or conjugations. There we go. The principal parts that you will find when you look up a Latin word in a glossary or you see it in your vocabulary list, it'll have 4 principal parts. These are the 4 words, the 4 forms that all other verb forms will come from. So they're very important that when you memorize the vocabulary, you memorize the 4 principal parts. And just a quick note here, there are a few verbs, as you will notice in your vocabulary lists, that only have 3 principal parts. And there are reasons for that we'll get to later, but just know that basically almost all Latin verbs have 4 principal parts. Now, when we memorize the different patterns of Latin verbs, we'll talk about paradigm verbs or pattern verbs. And we'll have first conjugation, second conjugation, third conjugation, fourth conjugation, and third IO conjugation. And each of the verbs here listed on the screen are our paradigm verbs, or the examples that we'll use to memorize to help us know how to conjugate each of these groupings. And if you know the pattern, then you can conjugate any verb in that category. So for first conjugation, our pattern verb or paradigm verb is laudo, laudari, laudavi, laudatum. Now, I'm kind of over-pronouncing here just so you can kind of get a sense of how those words are pronounced. And you'll notice, remember from the introductory lesson, that the long A, we'll kind of pronounce it by elongating it in the length of time that we pronounce it. So anything with a macron or that long mark, we sort of double the timing of it to indicate that it's long. So that's the first conjugation paradigm verb, laudo, to praise. Second conjugation paradigm verb is moneo, moneri, monoi, monetum, and this means to warn. Third conjugation paradigm verb is ago, ageri, egi, actum. It means to do or to make. Fourth conjugation paradigm verb is adeo, aderi, adewi, additum. And this word means, as you can probably figure out, means to hear or to listen. And then third conjugation IO paradigm verb is capao, caperi, capi, captum. And this word means to capture or to seize. And that is the third conjugation IO paradigm verb. So get used to seeing these. You'll see these paradigms a lot, but you'll look at these and begin to see a pattern on these verbs here. So the 4 principal parts, that's where they are. Laudo is first principal part. Laudare is the second principal part. Laudavi is the third principal part. And laudatum is the fourth principal part. And I did not mean to hit that space, so let's go back to make sure we get the information that I just skipped. There we go. All right, there's the 4 principal parts. Each of those columns are the different principal parts. And as we noted before, most Latin verbs have 4 principal parts. Some will have 3. And it is from these principal parts that all verb forms will come. So I've put a list together here of several common first conjugation verbs. And you should be able to see a pattern. If you notice, all of them in the first column, the first principal part, all end in O: laudo, amo, pugno, copo, libero, ero, and do. Second principal part, second column, all have long A's: ladari, and a long A and an RE at the end. So it's ladari, amari, pugnari, copari, liberari, erari, dari. And I'm sort of speeding through this just a little bit here. I'm not abiding by the elongating rule here, the pronouncing just because I'm trying to get through this a little bit quicker. Notice that do, dari, that's actually it breaks from the pattern. If you notice, there's no long A in the word dari. It looks like it's dare, but it's dari. There's no long A there. So that's sort of a renegade. So just keep that in mind. But the rest of them, you should all see that the second principal part ends in A-R-E. That's a pattern. The third principal part, you can see that all of them end in an A-V-I. Again, with the exception of do, dari, dedi. It, again, sort of is a renegade and breaks from the pattern. But the rest of them all have an A-V-I, third principal part ending. The stem plus the ending. And then the fourth principal part has an A-T-U-M. All of them at the end: laudatum, amatum, pugnatum, copatum, liberatum, eratum, datum. So if you just kind of take a step back and look at that slide as an entirety, you should be able to observe a pattern. That's why we call this a paradigm. Laudo, ladari, ladawi, ladatum is a paradigm or pattern for all first conjugation verbs. Now, got a quick note here. First conjugation verbs generally have a long A as the stem vowel. And you will see the stem vowel in the second principal part. That's really the place you need to look most closely at a verb when you're starting to learn it, is in the second principal part. That's really our jumping off point for beginning to break down or conjugate verbs. So that second column: ladari, amari, pugnari, copari, liberari, erari, and dari. Now, again, I made a quick note here. Nota bene. That means note well, or make sure you take note of this, that do, dari, dedi, datum is an exception to the general rule. There's no long A in the second principal part, and the third principal part has a different format than is normal. So that's the pattern for first conjugation verbs. Now, let's look at infinitives. An infinitive, if you remember from English grammar, an infinitive, you say, I would love to eat pizza. I don't know, let's go with that. To eat. That's an infinitive. It's not a verb, it's a verbal. It's part verb, but it functions differently in the sentence than a verb. And we'll get into that a little bit more later, but an infinitive: to eat, to run, to walk, to play, to sing, to worship, to warn. Those are infinitives. And the infinitive is basically the second principal part. So when you look at laudari, the literal translation for that right there is to praise. Moneri is to warn. Ageri is to do or to make. Auderi, to hear or to listen. And capere, to seize or to capture. And the telltale sign of an infinitive is the RE ending. When you see the RE ending at the end of a verb, you know it's the infinitive. And again, here is how you would translate these: to praise, to warn, to lead. Lead will also work. to hear or to take. So that's how you translate an infinitive. And it's very important. Infinitives are used extensively in Latin. Now, let's look at these categories of verbs. First conjugation, second, third, fourth, and third IO. Here are the infinitives for each of these categories: laudari, moneri, ageri, aderi, capere. Now, to see what the stem, or to find out the stem or base of any verb, you take the infinitive, which is what we have an example of each of these words here, and you drop the infinitive ending, which is the RE. You drop the RE from laudari and you get lauda. From moneri, you drop the RE, you get monet. From agere, you drop the re, you get age. From audere, you drop the re, you get audi. And from capere, you drop the re and you get cape. And from here, you now see the stem and the stem vowel for each of the paradigms. So for first conjugation, it's lauda, mone for second conjugation, age for third, ade for fourth, and cape for third IO. So it's important that when you're learning these verbs, you're able to find and discover what the stem is so that you can now conjugate the verb, which is what we're going to talk about next. Let's see here. Yeah, well, memorize the stem vowel for each conjugation. Know that first conjugation verbs have a long A, second conjugation verbs have a long E, third conjugations have a short E, fourth conjugation verbs have a long I, and third IO verbs have a short E. So you need to know, excuse me, you need to know that pattern. That's very, very important. There it is. Oh, I should have been saying that while I was running through here. Long A, there it is. Long E, short E, long I, and short E. And that is important because we need to know how to conjugate a verb. Well, what is conjugating a verb? Conjugating a verb is to take a verb's base or stem and add the verb personal endings. This is conjugating. It comes from the Latin word conjugare. The letter I, if you remember, is pronounced here. It's not actually functioning as a vowel. It's functioning as a consonant. And in English, that would get shifted into the German J. So that would be conjugare. But in Latin, we say conjugare. And it means to join together. So Latin is the joining together of the stem or the base plus the personal endings for a verb, and that equals conjugating. So we need to know how to do it for each of the tenses. And in this lesson, we're going to start off simple, just the present tense. And I promise this is so easy, you'll be able to pick this up very quickly. The personal endings, there are 6 of them for present tense, and they are simply ost, mus, tis, nt. Now, if you will notice, that first person singular is O, and on rare occasions, it's an M. So just kind of put that in the back of your brain, but we'll get to the M's later. But for the most part, like 99% of the time, it's just an O. And so when we do the chant, we'll simply say ost, mus, tis, nt. And if you want to practice that over and over again in your head, that's how I help my students get it memorized. It's ost, mus, tis, nt. Ost, mus, tis, nt. Ost, mus, tis, nt. Ost, mus, tis, nt. And you just keep saying it over and over again till you get it in your head. But that is first and second and third person, singular and plural. Ost, mus, tis, nt. So take the time, pause it here, and say it 10 times. Just literally pause the slideshow and just say it 10 times. I'll wait. Okay, so let's see how this actually functions. When you conjugate a verb, we're going to use laudo as our example. Remember, it's our paradigm verb. So lado, ladare, ladawi, ladatum. And if you remember, the second principal part is where we find the stem. So we drop that re ending, and it gives us lauda. And to that, we're going to add our endings, ost, mus, tis, nt. And we add it together, and we end up with laudo, laudas, laudat, laudamus, laudatus, laudant. Now, you may notice, because you're very observant, that the A in laudo disappeared. It should have been laudao, but if you notice how awkward that is to say, and because our mouths are basically lazy, that A coalesced or merged with the O, and it just dropped off. So it became laudo instead of laudao. And so now we have laudo in first person singular. In second person singular, we have laudas. Third person, laudat. And then the plural column, laudamus, laudatus, laudant. How does that translate? Well, it is simply I praise, you praise, he, she, or it praises, we praise, you all praise, and they praise. And by the way, when we conjugate these, often we'll just, for brevity's sake, we'll say in the third person singular, he praises. It's just awkward to say he, she, it praises. And so often we'll just take the masculine singular and say that out loud. You're welcome to use the feminine singular or the neuter singular, whatever helps you, but it's just awkward to say all three of them. So I praise, you praise, he praises, we praise, you all praise, and they praise. And again, a second person plural, you don't really have to have that all. You could just simply say you praise, and that would be acceptable. And again, for us Southerners or Texans, y'all praise. So that's how you conjugate a verb, and that's how you translate them. Now, keep in mind that when you translate, there are different nuances of how you translate this. You could say I praise for first person singular present tense, but you could also say I am praising, I do praise, and these are what we call the present, simple present, the progressive present, and the emphatic present. I praise is simple, I am praising is progressive, I do praise is emphatic, and that goes for second person and third person as well. We won't run through all of those. Those are the different nuances. You can see the same thing on the plural side. We praise is the simple, we are praying is progressive, and we do praise is emphatic. We'll let the slideshow run through its transitions here. There we go, simple present. All right. Should have made that a little bit quicker. There we go. They do praise is the emphatic present. All right. So hopefully that makes sense. There are different ways you can translate a verb. If you want it just to be simple, you just translate it, we praise. If you want it to be progressive action, we are praising. And if you want to be emphatic, you can say we do praise. And that's true for first, second, and third, singular or plural. Now, that's first conjugation. And we're not going to do third and fourth and third IO right now. Those are reserved for later chapters. But this chapter, we're looking at both first conjugation and second conjugation. Our paradigm verb was monao, monoi, monatum. And there's the stem. You drop the RE, and that gives us mone as the stem. We add our endings, OST, mus, tis, int. And unlike laudo, that vowel does not drop off here in second conjugation. It actually stays in first person singular. So it's monao, mones, monet, monemus, monetus, monet. And since we already learned that this word means to warn, I bet you could translate this right now without even looking at the next slide. What do you think monao is? Want to guess? Yeah, if you said it means I warn, you were right. And mones is you warn, monet he, she, or it warns, monemus we warn, monetus you all warn, and monent they warn. And that's how you conjugate in the second conjugation. It's the same as the first. You just take the second principal part, drop the RE ending, add the personal endings to the stem, and you can conjugate any verb. And the various nuances for second conjugation verbs, this should do it fairly quickly here, I do believe. There we go. Same thing, I warn, I am warning, I do warn. Simple, progressive, and emphatic. Same thing with the plural side. There we go. We warn, we are warning, we do warn. All right. Take a breath. Hey, if this is overwhelming a little bit, pause it. Take your time, and then come back to it. But I'm going to go ahead and jump into it, and we're going to look at the next thing, which is imperatives. These are, as we mentioned earlier, one of the different moods. We looked at indicative. Now we're looking at imperatives, and imperatives are commands. So let's take the two verbs that we've learned so far, first conjugation and second conjugation. Again, we're going to start off with the infinitive, laudare and monere. And this is so simple, anybody could get this. To make an imperative, again, take that RE, the infinitive ending, and drop it off. And that gives you your imperative singular, lauda, praise. I am commanding somebody to praise, an individual. Or monet, I'm warning. You're saying warn somebody. You're telling one individual to go warn somebody. That is imperative singular. Now, if you want to make it plural, if you're going to tell a bunch of people, more than one person to praise, you would take that, lauda, and simply add the te ending. And that would give you laudate or monete. And that simply is praise. I'm telling you all to praise, or you all are I'm telling you all to warn, monete. And so, pretty simple. Imperative is simply the infinitive. Drop the ending. There's the singular, lauda. Add a te, you get the plural, laudate. So hey, we're almost done with this lesson. That was pretty simple. We looked at first conjugation verbs. We looked at principal parts and conjugating and understanding the 5 different characteristics of verbs. We looked at imperatives. The last thing we're going to look at on this lesson is adverbs. And I bet you remember what adverbs are from your English grammar back in school. But adverb is from the Latin word adverbum. Ad, the preposition ad plus verbum, which you already learned, means word. And so it means next to or near the word, near the most important word, the verb. And these are adverbs. These are words that modify verbs. They also can modify adjectives or other adverbs. And these adverbs will generally come before the word they modify in Latin syntax. So that is the lesson for this chapter. Go back and rewatch this video if you need to. You can also look at the PowerPoint slideshow or Keynote PowerPoint slideshow for vocabulary, where we have this chapter's vocabulary and all of its pronunciations. We'll be discussing this in class the next period, so make sure you watch this video. If you need to, watch it again, and be ready with the vocab. You'll have a quiz by the end of that first period. You'll have a Google quiz you have to do by midnight. Have a good day.